Detective. The sun was setting over the city as Detective Sarah Williams sat at her desk, scrolling through her case files. She had been working on the case of a missing woman for weeks, and she was no closer to finding any leads. Sarah was a seasoned detective, but this case had her stumped. She had a gut feeling that something was off, but she just couldn't put her finger on it. As she sat there, lost in thought, her partner, Detective James Peterson, walked into the room. "Hey, Sarah," he said, "have you seen the news?" Sarah shook her head. "No, why?" "Another woman has gone missing," James said. "It's the same MO as our case." Sarah's heart sank. "Damn it," she muttered. "We have to find this guy before he hurts anyone else." Together, Sarah and James spent the next few days poring over the evidence, trying to find any connections between the two cases. They interviewed witnesses, analyzed surveillance footage, and scoured social media for any clues. But every lead they found turned out to be a dead end. Just when they were about to give up hope, Sarah received a call from a confidential informant. The informant, who wished to remain anonymous, claimed to have information about the case. Sarah met with the informant in a seedy bar on the outskirts of town. The informant was a wiry man with greasy hair and a twitchy demeanor. He told Sarah that he had overheard a group of men talking about a woman they had kidnapped and were holding for ransom. The informant didn't know where the woman was being held, but he gave Sarah a description of the men and their car. Sarah thanked the informant and relayed the information to James. They spent the next few hours searching the city for the car, and finally, they spotted it parked outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The detectives cautiously approached the warehouse, their guns drawn. As they entered the dark, musty interior, they heard the sound of muffled cries coming from one of the rooms. They followed the sound and found a young woman tied up and gagged, tears streaming down her face. Sarah quickly untied the woman and took her outside to safety. Meanwhile, James continued searching the warehouse for the kidnappers. He soon found them holed up in a back room, counting their ransom money. The men were caught red-handed, and Sarah and James quickly arrested them. As they drove the men back to the station, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They had finally cracked the case and rescued the missing woman. But their satisfaction was short-lived. As they were booking the suspects, Sarah received a call from the coroner's office. They had just completed an autopsy on the body of the woman from Sarah's original case. The cause of death: strangulation. Sarah's heart sank. She realized that the missing woman they had just rescued was just the tip of the iceberg. There were more victims out there, and they needed to find them before it was too late. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and James worked tirelessly to track down the rest of the kidnappers' victims. It was a grueling process, but they never gave up hope. They interviewed witnesses, analyzed evidence, and followed up on every lead. Finally, they were able to uncover the kidnappers' entire operation, which involved a network of shady criminals and corrupt officials. The case made headlines, and Sarah and James were hailed as heroes. But Sarah knew that the real heroes were the victims who had suffered unspeakable horrors at the hands of their kidnappers. She vowed to never stop fighting for justice, no matter how difficult the case or how high the case made headlines, and Sarah and James were hailed as heroes. But Sarah knew that the real heroes were the victims who had suffered unspeakable horrors at the hands of their kidnappers. She vowed to never stop fighting for justice, no matter how difficult the case or how high the stakes. Years went by, and Sarah continued to work as a detective, taking on some of the most challenging cases the city had ever seen. But no matter how hard she worked, she could never forget the victims of that first case. They haunted her dreams and weighed heavily on her conscience. One day, Sarah received a call from a man who claimed to have information about the kidnappers' ringleader. The man, who refused to give his name, told Sarah that the ringleader had recently resurfaced in the city and that he was planning something big. Sarah was skeptical at first, but she knew better than to ignore a tip like this. She spent the next few weeks following up on the lead, using all of her resources to track down the ringleader. Finally, after weeks of searching, Sarah found the ringleader's hideout. She snuck in under the cover of darkness, her gun drawn, ready to take down the man who had caused so much pain and suffering. But when she entered the room, she found the ringleader sitting at a desk, surrounded by stacks of cash and paperwork. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "Detective Williams," he said, with a smirk. "I've been expecting you." Sarah didn't respond. She was too focused on the man's face. It was familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. The ringleader chuckled. "I see you don't recognize me," he said. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Bonds." Sarah's heart stopped. Jonathan Bonds was the man who had kidnapped and killed the woman from her first case. She had been so focused on finding the rest of his victims that she had never even considered that he might still be out there, living his life, free and unrepentant. "How did you find me?" Sarah demanded. Jonathan shrugged. "I've been keeping tabs on you," he said. "I knew you'd never stop looking for me, and now here you are. I guess you finally caught up with me." Sarah raised her gun, her hand shaking. "You're going to pay for what you did," she said. Jonathan just laughed. "You think so?" he said. "You're too late, detective. I've already won." Sarah didn't understand what he meant, but before she could ask, she heard a loud explosion from outside. The room shook, and debris rained down from the ceiling. "What the hell was that?" she demanded. Jonathan just smiled. "That, detective, was your city. I've rigged explosives all over town. In a few minutes, this entire place will be nothing but rubble." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She knew that he wasn't bluffing. She had to do something, and fast. She raised her gun again, aiming it at Jonathan's head. "Tell me how to stop it," she said. "Tell me how to defuse the bombs." Jonathan just laughed again. "You can't," he said. "Not without the detonator." Sarah felt a surge of panic. She had to find the detonator, but where could it be? How could she possibly find it in time? As she frantically searched the room, she saw something out of the corner of her eye, a photo on the wall. She walked over to the photo and studied it. It was a picture of Jonathan Bonds standing in front of a large building. Sarah recognized the building immediately. It was the city's power plant. She realized that the power plant was the key. If she could disable the plant, she could cut off the detonator's power source, rendering it useless. Without a second thought, Sarah raced out of the hideout and towards the power plant. As she ran, she could see the destruction that Jonathan had caused. Buildings were collapsing, people were running for their lives, and the sound of explosions filled the air. But Sarah didn't stop. She had a mission, and nothing was going to stand in her way. When she reached the power plant, she found the room where the detonator was located. It was heavily guarded, but Sarah didn't hesitate. She charged in, her gun blazing. The guards put up a fight, but Sarah was too fast, too determined. She took them down one by one until she finally reached the detonator. With shaking hands, Sarah disabled the detonator, cutting off the power to the explosives all over the city. She collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her face. She had saved the city. But more than that, she had avenged the victims of Jonathan Bonds. She had shown him that justice would always prevail, no matter how long it took. As Sarah was hailed once again as a hero, she knew that the memory of that first case would never leave her. But now she had closure. She had finally put the past to rest, and she could move forward, knowing that she had made a difference. And as she walked away from the scene, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and satisfaction. She had done what she had set out to do, and she had done it with bravery, with determination, and with justice on her side.